For the first time in modern geopolitics, something unusual is happening, and almost no one is talking about what it really means. A country outside Europe has just been invited into a space that was never meant for outsiders. Not the United States. Not China. Not any global superpower. But Canada. And that raises a question you should be asking right now: why Canada, and why now? Because this is not just another diplomatic trip. Prime Minister Mark Carney is heading to Armenia to attend the European Political Community Summit, a forum designed exclusively for European leaders in response to war, economic fragmentation, and growing uncertainty in the global order. This is not routine diplomacy. This is a signal that Canada is no longer being seen as just a North American country tied to the United States, but as a nation becoming increasingly relevant in global strategic conversations.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is off to Armenia this weekend for meetings with European leaders about strategic issues that touch on defense and the economy. He'll be attending the European Political Community Summit, and it's the first time that a country that's not inside Europe is part of these meetings. These meetings have been going on since the 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and they touch on how to better economically integrate the continent and to deal with strategic issues around defense. These meetings include not just the EU, but other countries like Iceland, Britain, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. And they're meant to sort of shore up Europe's way of responding to these broader issues, whether it's coming from Russia and defense concerns, China with economic concerns, and lately, what's going on in Washington. Carney's office has framed these meetings as a way to advance Canada's diversification, specifically after a defense deal signed last year, in which Canada can work with European defense firms on contracts and secure loans from the EU. Canada's also trying to diversify trade and double non-US exports by 2030.
Now think about this. When was the last time a country outside Europe was invited into a space specifically built to protect European interests? Exactly. It doesn't happen casually. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to understand what this summit represents. The European political community was born in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a turning point that forced Europe to rethink everything. Its economic integration, its defense coordination, and even its long-term strategic independence. Europe suddenly found itself asking uncomfortable questions. Can it rely on its traditional allies? Can it defend itself independently? And how should it respond to growing pressure not just from Moscow and Beijing, but even from Washington? This summit became a space where those questions are addressed behind closed doors. A European space. A strategic room. And now, Canada is in that room. That should make you pause. Because invitations like this are not symbolic gestures. They are calculated decisions. They reflect trust, relevance, and strategic value. And Carney is not attending just to observe. He is attending to position.
So it's the first time a non-European leader has joined this European Political Community Summit. What do you make of Canada's position at this forum?
Well, first of all, I do think we should be flattered as a country for the invitation, because it is a reflection of how America is rewriting the rules, how the rest of the world is struggling to figure out how do we accommodate this, and the degree to which the world is looking to the speech that Prime Minister Carney gave in Davos as maybe an indication of how we do that. So I do think, we can look at it and say, well, there's a little bit of a tip of the hat there. But the reason that Mark Carney is going is not for that. He is going because he will, as Graham just mentioned, accept any invitation anywhere that puts him in rooms with European leaders so that he can strengthen our economic ties, strengthen our trade ties, strengthen investment ties. He is on a relentless campaign to try to draw people from around the world, and particularly Europe, to Canada, because we are going to have to offset some of the risks that America is creating for our economy.
His office has made it clear that this trip is directly tied to a much larger strategy. Canada is actively trying to diversify its economic relationships, reduce its reliance on the United States, and expand its footprint in European markets. That includes deeper defense cooperation with European firms, access to EU financing mechanisms, expanding trade and investment partnerships, and perhaps most importantly, a long-term goal to double non-US exports by 2030. Think about that for a second. Doubling non-US exports is not a small adjustment. It is a structural shift. It is Canada preparing for a world where depending too heavily on one partner, especially an unpredictable one, is no longer safe. And that brings us to the bigger picture. What is happening here is not just about Canada. It is about a changing global order. There is a growing recognition, particularly in Europe, that the world is shifting. The United States, once seen as the anchor of stability, is becoming more unpredictable in its economic and strategic behavior. Policies change quickly. Alliances are tested. Trade disputes emerge even among partners. At the same time, China continues to operate as a structural competitor, expanding its influence and forcing countries to rethink their alignments. So here is the question: in a world where traditional power centers are becoming less predictable, what do countries actually want? The answer is not just power. It is stability. It is consistency. It is reliability. And this is exactly where Canada, under Mark Carney, is positioning itself. A country that may not dominate militarily or economically like the United States or China, but one that offers something increasingly valuable: predictability. And in today's environment, predictability is power. What stands out most about this moment is not just the invitation itself, but the strategy behind accepting it. Carney is not waiting to be included. He is actively placing Canada in rooms where decisions are being shaped. Not because Canada traditionally belonged there, but because Canada is making itself relevant there. That is a completely different approach to diplomacy. This is not passive engagement. This is active positioning. It reflects a clear understanding of how influence works in modern geopolitics. You don't wait for recognition. You build relevance until recognition becomes unavoidable. And here is where it gets even more interesting. There is a deeper shift happening beneath the surface of Canada's foreign policy. Under Carney, Canada appears to be moving away from a purely values-driven approach towards something more pragmatic, more interest-driven. That means engaging broadly, prioritizing economic outcomes, and operating within the realities of today's global system rather than idealized versions of it. Now ask yourself, is that a good thing or a risky move? Because this approach is not without criticism. Some argue that it could compromise traditional principles. But others see it as necessary adaptation. In a world defined by uncertainty, resilience matters more than rhetoric. And Carney's strategy aligns with that reality.
Well, it sort of comes back to the observation that Mr. Carney made. This is the world that we live in now. So in a world where China is China, India is India, and suddenly it appears as though the U.S. has turned on us all, do we have to instead focus our attentions, our foreign policy, on self-interest? Do we have to move rather from this idea of trying to advance our broader public interest and human values, trying to project our values around the world, to trying to secure objectives, trying to secure transactional deals? And that's got to be the real politic of where we are. And people are right to observe that that is what's driving our foreign policy right now. And frankly, not everyone in Canada supports that, but it would appear that a majority of Canadians do.
Countries today are not just trying to project values. They are trying to survive volatility. They are trying to build systems that can absorb shocks, adapt to disruptions, and maintain stability even when global conditions shift rapidly. And Canada is quietly aligning itself with that mindset. But here is where the story takes a sharper turn. For years, Canada's global role was largely defined within a US-led framework. Its influence, its trade, its strategic positioning, all deeply tied to Washington. That model worked for decades. But now, that assumption is being challenged. Why? Because under Donald Trump, the United States has moved toward a more transactional and inconsistent approach. Tariffs on allies, renegotiated agreements, sudden policy shifts. This approach may project strength domestically, but internationally, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty changes behavior. When allies start to feel uncertain, they begin to look elsewhere. Not necessarily to replace the United States, but to diversify away from it. To build alternative partnerships. To reduce risk. And this is exactly the space Canada is stepping into. Not as a replacement for the United States, but as something different. A stabilizing presence. A consistent partner. A country that does not dramatically shift positions overnight. And that is why this invitation matters. It suggests that Canada is no longer being seen simply as an extension of North America. It is being recognized as a country capable of operating independently in major strategic discussions. A country that can contribute to shaping outcomes, not just following them. And this is how influence evolves. Not through declarations. Not through speeches. But through reliability. Through consistent engagement. Through being present when decisions are made. And that brings us back to Armenia. This visit is not just a diplomatic engagement. It is a signal of repositioning. A signal that Canada is actively redefining how it engages with the world, where it builds its partnerships, and how it secures its future. But here is the real question you should be thinking about. What happens next? Because invitations create opportunities, but they also create expectations. If Canada wants to maintain this position, it has to deliver. It has to turn presence into influence. Strategy into outcomes. Engagement into long-term partnerships. And that is not guaranteed. Will Canada succeed in doubling its non-US exports by 2030? Will it deepen its integration with European markets? Will it become a consistent voice in strategic discussions beyond North America? Or will this moment remain symbolic? That depends on what happens after the summit. Because geopolitics is not shaped by single events. It is shaped by sustained action. And right now, Canada is at the beginning of something. Not a dramatic shift that dominates headlines overnight, but a gradual repositioning that could redefine its role over time. A transition from being a regional player to becoming a globally relevant actor. And those kinds of transitions are easy to miss when they are happening, but impossible to ignore once they are complete. So the next time you hear about a summit like this, don't just think about who is attending. Think about why they are there. Think about what it signals. Think about what is changing beneath the surface. Because sometimes, the most important shifts in global politics are not the loudest ones, they are the quiet ones. And this is one of them. If you want analysis that goes beyond headlines and breaks down the deeper shifts shaping global politics, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. And let me know in the comments, do you think Canada can truly reposition itself as a global strategic player, or is this just a temporary moment of attention? Because where Canada goes next might matter a lot more than people realize.